Just because a film is shot on a high-end camera, it doesn't guarantee it will look good. As a filmmaker, you can fall into the trap of thinking that a bigger sensor size or a higher quality sensor will automatically give you more cinematic footage. And in this day and age, it's extremely simple to actually get your hands on a 6K camera or a 12K camera, or there are even now 17K cameras which are capable of shooting 17K RAW, which is not nearly as important as you might think, and it won't automatically make your footage look super cinematic. Wanting your film to be in the highest quality is not a bad thing. It's actually quite good and quite positive because you think and you know that your film has a soul and you want to show it in the best resolution that you can show it. But thinking that you need a super high resolution to show a film is where the trap begins to kind of open up. And especially if you start to rely on the 6K footage. And if you just think that getting a 6K sensor or a 12K sensor will automatically make your footage look more beautiful and more cinematic just because of pure raw output power, it's not necessarily true. There are a lot more layers into actual cinema and making your footage look cinematic than just having a super high dynamic range camera. In fact, in some cases, having a super high dynamic range camera can be a negative if you don't know how to use it in post-production and color correction, if you just had that super powerful sensor. And you know, there is a quote, I'm not really sure where it's from, but with great power comes great responsibility, and that can be very much translated into the camera world. If you have a 6K or a 12K camera or a 17K camera, it is very easily to find yourself being comfortable into shooting like super wide shots because you have a 17K camera, and then later you can reframe into multiple different shots, you know, maybe close-up, details, and have your scene basically entirely crafted in post, which is not, again, itself a negative and a bad thing. That's why there are 17K cameras, because they allow you to do those things. And 17K resolution is absolutely fantastic when you need massive VFX pipelines later on, because VFX requires a lot of information that 17K sensor can produce. But relying completely on 17K sensor and being like, oh, I can just put my feet up on the table and not do anything in pre-production and creating a storyboard and story because I can cut it later in post, that's where the trap begins, and that's where it becomes extremely bad and poor for your film, because it's not going to look magical. It maybe will look technically sound and beautiful and perfect and aesthetic, but you're going to lose that magic, and people are not going to feel that intent that filmmaking and generally crafting a scene and the film has. And that magic is what's been kind of slowly getting lost, especially in the newer modern Hollywood films, where it's just about making the most amount of money that you can make. Now, in my opinion, you should never neglect creating a frame specifically and with intention. And I think that's where the magic can happen and synchronize if you do it very intentionally and beautifully. If you have a 12K camera, which is extremely powerful, you can use it and utilize the 12K sensor power for absolutely beautiful output of the most beautiful footage you can capture. And if you combine it with intention, basically like you have a film camera that you have only one film roll, you cannot rewatch it, and so you make everything in your frame look super intentional and super purposeful, then that will be the strongest possible combination, and your film is going to look the most guaranteeingly beautiful it can, because you have a combination of super powerful high dynamic range sensors, and you have your intent on making the frame speak, tell a story, show character, show maybe 1,000 different little plot lines that are not important for the main plot, but it subconsciously tells a story about the world your character is in. You can light the scene super intentionally to tell different stories. You can use negative space and use the framing to tell the story itself, and not just rely on, you know, wide shot and then you will do and cover your ass as you need in post. But make everything super intentional, and that's the strongest combination that you can have with strong camera sensors and not neglecting the actual frame. I actually bought a Pixis 6K camera, and when I bought it, I made two very strong rules for using it. Rule number one is I'm not gonna force using it just because it is Pixis. There will be situations and shoots where using my Lumix, which actually has autofocus, and it's more easier to work when you're a one-man band than Pixis. In those situations, I'm not gonna force using a Pixis because it's just gonna make my and entire crew or actors or whoever is there with me on set day a lot harder and more complicated. So don't force using Pixis if you don't actually need it, and if you don't have a workflow and people around who can work with the Pixis, because it's not really a solo shooter camera. And a second rule is I'm not gonna use that 6K footage as a crutch. Now, I am all the time shooting in 6K RAW because it is raw output footage, and if you want to shoot 4K RAW, you have to crop in. which is not something that I want to use because I want to utilize the full height of the sensor. Since I already have it, might as well use it. That's my logic, but I'm never going to use it as a crutch. I'm never going to go on set and be like, oh, I don't want to think like what the next shot will be, or I don't want to do some pre-production and storyboarding. I'm just going to put a wide lens and then, you know, cover my ass later in post with cutting those shots up. I'm using a 6K like footage and 6K raw as kind of a tool. If I accidentally miss something on set or something isn't framed that it shouldn't be, then I'm gonna crop in a little bit and, you know, still have the 4K footage, but I'm not gonna use it, you know, as a crutch. I'm gonna use it as a tool if something goes wrong. Now, to just further prove my point, you don't need the highest end gear to make your short film. And if you have an idea for the short film, you have people who want to make that short film with you, and the only thing stopping you is, oh, I don't have like a camera that has a 6K sensor or a 4K sensor even. I'm saying do it anyway, because I started making films with basically the cameras that use cassettes, and I'm not sure if that was even full HD. I think that was maybe 720p caps. And I filmed a lot of my films on my phone and then my tools that I had around me, maybe some even like old GoPros and cameras. But basically, if you want to really create something and you have your vision and you want to put that vision to life and make a film, you do not need the highest end gear to make it. Yes, the highest end gear does help a lot, but it also introduces a lot of complicated variables. Let's say Pixis doesn't have autofocus, so you're gonna need to learn how to pull focus manually, which is gonna take a lot more time and a lot more trial and error, or you're gonna need a focus puller on set. So use and utilize what you have and don't rush into getting better gear just for the sake of getting better gear. If you have something to start with, I say start with that. And then when you see that you have room for improvement and you actually need something better, then invest into something better. And in the meantime, you can make shots look absolutely beautiful without having super high-end gear. You can actually focus more on composition, making the framing look as beautiful as it can look, not shooting everything at super shallow depth of field, because sometimes you want to show more textures and more of the world that your character is in, and you want to make lighting super intentional and look the best it can look. So it's not always about the gear. Sometimes it's more about intention and more about working with what you have. So to summarize, if you don't have a super high-end and super high-resolution camera, it does not mean your film will look horrible. In fact, it can still look absolutely beautiful and even better than somebody who has a super high-resolution camera and doesn't know how to utilize it and use it properly. Thank you for watching. I hope this video inspired you. If you want, I can actually do a comparison. I can make a scene with my Pixis 6K, but I'm not gonna light it or do any set design whatsoever. And then I'm gonna recreate the same scene with lighting and with set design and with intent put into it, but with my iPhone, just to show that resolution is not everything in making something look cinematic. Thank you for watching again, and I will see you in the next one.